going to get kicked off here. And so I just want to welcome those of you that are logging in. You should see your polling question. So please go ahead and answer the polling question. I want to welcome you again to this month's webinar. A couple of tips. You can see people already saying hello. Jan just said hello from Boston as well. So please go ahead, let us know that you're here. Use the chat functionality the entire time. Also, a couple other little tips, just for viewing preference, I really encourage you at the top right of your screen to click on the gallery view instead of the speaker view. So for the speaker view, I am probably filling up your screen right now, and that can be a little overwhelming for people. I recognize that, so I really encourage you to get into the gallery view. You should be able to see 4 of us if you are on that, especially if you're in full screen. So you will see Bennett. He is your technical support today. So you'll be able to see his email address. So if there is anything that's not working, please definitely make sure that you're doing that. The other thing is in the chat function. Now I can see all of yours because I'm a panelist, but in the chat function, you're going to see a little blue area that says panelists, or you can chat each other specifically, or it says panelists and attendees. So turn it on to everyone. Make sure that your fellow attendees can see each other. And especially, you guys will really enjoy sharing comments and ideas throughout this. So I really want to encourage you to do that. So Chris, Tiffany, you guys about ready to dive in? Sound good?
Oh, yeah.
All right, fantastic. Well, just to make sure that everybody is in the right place and just level setting everybody is welcome to Bluewater's monthly live webinar series, How to Translate Your Learning and Development Data into Meaningful Data. So today we are going to cover the importance of data in your decision making, your biggest data challenges that actually hinder your outcomes, and how to build what we call a decision analytics framework that will allow you to translate your data into meaningful action in your business. Now, I'm sure the panelists are not going to be happy with me, but spoiler alert, we personally think this is the game changer for the future of business and those who are going to be successful tomorrow. So I'm a little biased, but that's okay.
It's a good setup.
Just a little setup. There you go. So here, it's yours. But you guys, welcome. And Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
That's great. Well, welcome, everybody. I know that on behalf of Tiffany and Daisy and Bennett and myself, we're just really excited that y'all are here today. And we have an opportunity to chat and discuss. And as Daisy mentioned, we want this to be interactive. So post your questions in chat, and we'll make sure and get to as much as we can. But what we do understand and know is that in a workforce that's really changing and evolving today, using data to drive decisions about your people is critical. And as we go through our conversation today and really begin to talk about that, it's going to be very focused on people data. So when we talk about data, just always go back to your individuals, your people, your workforce. What does that really mean? Because as learning and talent professionals, we all look at this data and we're collecting massive amounts of data right now. The question Tiffany are going to get into, are we collecting the right type of data? Are we collecting data that allows us to begin to understand our workforce? And so as we begin that and looking at understanding the workforce, one of the things that as Tiffany and I were preparing for this chat, we started talking about the data that we're collecting. Is it focused on the past or the future? And I think, Tiffany, we kind of came to the assumption is, wow, it's all about retro look. It's about what happened as opposed to looking forward, isn't it? I mean, what type of things did we kind of come up with and see and look at in terms of how we're collecting data and what that looks like today?
Sure. So when we were talking, what I see mostly with our clients and others that I've talked to is we're talking about performance reviews and sometimes performance and potential maybe 9-box placements for succession. What training have they completed? And it's all about what has the employee done and how do we think they're doing, but not a lot of what are we going to have them do? What do they need to be preparing for? What, based on what they've done, tells us what they need to do next.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, Tiffany, just to think about what they've done. Maybe it's just a job. What jobs did they hold as opposed to what did they learn? What did they achieve? What knowledge did they come up with? So being able to understand that begins to be a little bit different. But I think one of the big areas that I look at and see as a problem is that there's so many assumptions that are being made today without the right data. Assumptions on the workforce, assumptions on people, and those mistakes are around those assumptions are pretty significant. My dad used to have a saying about assumptions, but I won't share that with everybody. It's a little too colorful. But the reality of did yours as well, Dacia?
Oh yeah.
But those assumptions get us into trouble every single time. And as the workforce is changing, I think we want to get to a place to where we're much more focused on being accurate in the information and data. But Tiffany, where are some of the gaps or what some of the places where we have assumptions that we should be able to easily fill?
So now that I get to give you my most favorite answer is that it depends. It depends on each organization. And I think a lot of what I see is we start with what we have. What data do we have and what does it tell us? And so when you do that, if you're trying to get to something specific or you're trying to learn something specific, you're going to fill in the part that wasn't there. So my data tells me I have a bunch of high performers. That must mean, but it must mean we have the right employees. Does it? Do you know if they have the right skills for where your business is headed? So what I see people do is they start with what they can get. And right now there's no question that we're in a period where it's easy to get data. You can get as much as you want. It's now something that we're talking about big data and AI driven decisions. But really what we're getting to, are we using the right data? Are we looking at the right pieces of information to drive the information that we need to know? The other thing that we see a lot in organizations, and I think it happens without people realizing it, is making their decisions based on emotion versus fact. And that's where having the right data can help us out there. I know, in life, I think we can all say there's a point where we've made a decision made on emotion that probably might not have ended up being the right decision in the end. So those are just a few of the places that I can highlight just off the top of my head.
Yeah, I love the part that you were talking about there, where when we have an absence of information, we tend to fill it in. And what if we're filling it in with emotion or wrong assumptions becomes a problem? Let's go back to what you talked about, performance reviews, or even getting into succession planning and looking at that. I mean, where are some of the places that we don't have enough information that we just automatically fill a gap in?
Around the individual's capabilities, around what is their experience, what are their skills and capabilities that they hold, not because of the job they've held inside of your organization, but what is it that your talent has to offer that you might not be tapping into?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And I think for everybody participating today, one of the critical elements that Tiffany and I are going to focus on is talking about data around the individual. We see a lot of analytics and analysis of learning and talent information that's very focused on the organization, but we can't make real change happen or get to meaningful action until we get down to the individual. It's the individual and that information about a person, about Bennett or Dacia or Tiffany or myself, that allows you to begin to make decisions. There are higher level elements about that a CEO, and as a CEO, I would want to know, well, what are the capabilities of my people in order to be able to go achieve a task? Not at a granular level, but a high level. But if we're going to make change in the organization, it has to happen person by person by person. So we go in through that process. And I'm going to throw one other thing at you, Tiffany, we didn't talk about in prep, but when we think about this, what kind of disservice are we doing to managers, especially young and new managers, by not providing them the right information?
Well, my first emotional being at managers, you're setting them up to not be able to do their job. So you're going to further skew the information that you get, because if you're measuring them on anything that their team is or isn't doing, and you're not giving them the appropriate data to help drive action, then you're stopping them from doing what their potential is or what they can do. So now you're going to see an issue with your managers but it might not necessarily be the people holding the job, but what have you done as an organization to help them help you, essentially?
Great. So our go ahead.
Well, okay, first we're talking about people. So this is my passion subject. I can talk all day long. But we've talked a lot about gaps in data and where people are missing data. And my question to you is, what do you think, or how do you think that people can get the right data?
Well, I think the first thing, that's a great question. I love you asking me questions. You do that all the time. The first thing that has to happen is that we have to understand what the drivers of our business are. And I want to talk specifically about business drivers, because as we go into organizations and we talk to them about their business drivers, inevitably the first thing that comes out of their mouth is technology. Well, I have to implement a piece of technology. I have to change technology. No. What are your business drivers? What is it that your business is doing? And it's a real struggle for many in organizations to be able to get there and to have that conversation. One of my favorites, Gary Kelly, the CEO at Southwest Airlines, at the beginning of every year, posts a piece to all the employees, and also sends it out to vendors and partners and says, here are our 5 priorities for the year. Those are the 5 business drivers. In many organizations, we see that a business driver might be increasing margin. Mm-hmm. It could be, I've got a new product or service that we want to roll out, and we need to be able to focus on that particular rollout. It could be a big acquisition or organizational change to begin to enter new markets or enter into international markets. There are a lot of things that are business drivers. So the key piece in answer to your question, Tiffany, is number one, you have to know what the purpose of your business is and what the goals and objectives of that business are. So without understanding that, you're going to be lost in this process and you're going to be making a lot of assumptions.
I wanted to highlight one of the things that I see when working with different organizations is it's not uncommon that they're very clearly defined at some level in the organization. But a lot of times what we see as you go down into the levels of the organization or across the different business units, that they get watered down either with interpretation or what does it mean to me? And there's not clarity, or there's misalignment between the business on what their business drivers are. That happens, how are we possibly knowing that we're making decisions that's driving to or impacting the business drivers for the org?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is sometimes they are stated, but they don't flow all the way down to individuals in the organization. So there's a communication, there's a change gap that begins to happen there as well. But let's go know those business drivers. Which are your business priorities? Number one, that's most important. The second thing you've got to do in order to begin to gather that data is really understand the questions around your workforce and how those questions are connected back up to the business drivers. So I'll give you an example real quick. Client we work with, their goal was to determine what great looked like for an employee in a specific job in a specific segment of their business, because they wanted great employees. They wanted to hire them. They wanted to develop them. They wanted to grow them. That was critical. So as you begin to go through there, that's a wonderful question. What does great look like for this particular role? But there's other questions that fall into that as well, because one of the questions that I know that I'm asking a lot of business leaders right now is, what's the demand for skills in your organization and what's the supply? And how do you match that together? Because you'll look at the demand as X minus Y, the supply equals either an oversupply or an undersupply on skills. It's great information about the workforce to begin to go in and actually look and adapt to current and future situations. So you got to do business drivers first, then you go into workforce questions, Now I can begin to talk about data requirements and where we want to grab data or understand data in order to be able to know exactly what we should be doing.
You know, when we talk about this with clients, one of the things I like to highlight with them are the reason we go straight into the workforce questions are because with any organization, our number one asset is always and will always be our people. No matter what technology changes, our number one asset will be the people inside the organization. And regardless of what drivers you put out there, regardless of what you say that the purpose of your company is and what they're achieving, they cannot be achieved without the talent of their people to get there. You know, you can go buy a new software, but all you've done is bought a new software. You didn't achieve an impact to any overall business drivers. And so I think it's critical when we talk to clients about that connection. I think we all know it. I don't think there's anybody that's listening right now that's like, oh my gosh, people are important. What? We all know that, but it's important to drive that the work that they get done or what we know about their abilities, what they can do, where they want to develop to, what we can develop them to is, and how it directly impacts what we're trying to do as a business.
Yeah, I think it's really about doing more and more every day to understand what's really going on around us. And I know we've got one of the poll questions in Bennett. I'm really interested in the results there. And there we go. So in that first question, talking about workforce change and a critical piece that we have to understand. So just sharing the results there. The question was, demands of my workforce will change significantly over the next 12 months. Roles, skills, etc. Wow. We have 48% that agree, 24% strongly agree, only 5% strongly disagree. That's a massive change that's going to be ahead in terms of what things look like from an organization in a transition standpoint. So Tiffany, what kind of stress does that put on an organization to begin to think about that amount of change without the right information to be able to guide that change?
Sure. I've been reading studies and things around this. This is probably one of the number one concerns with organizations around the world. And also, here's the thing. This isn't because of COVID either. This is because our workforce was changing before we went into a pandemic. It might have helped out with bringing it to light and, everybody realizing it together, but the way that the workforce has been changing, the technology impacts to the people that we have and how we get our work done, that's nothing new. We've been dealing with it. The rate of change and the rapid decision making, that's nothing new. We know that if you're not willing to change, your business is going to get left behind very quickly. So with that being said, this is huge for organizations and people are trying to figure it out. And in addition to what skills do we need, there's the question of, oh my gosh, are skills becoming obsolete? What do I do with those people? And I feel like depending on which way you're minded, you're either worried you're not going to have the people or you're worried that you're going to have to let your workforce go. Our assets are number one. Our people are our number one asset. We don't want to let them go, but we want to take care of them. So it's huge. I think though, I would love for us at some point to run the same type of poll questions, but based to an employee, because I bet what we're going to find out are that employees are not afraid that this is happening, that they're sitting back going, great, what do you want me to do? How can I help? I'm ready for it. Let's change. And so I think being able to close that gap and knowing where your employees stand with this and having those data points, it might even drive you to making the changes that you need quicker because you've tapped into the people that are actually going to be responsible for helping make it happen.
Yeah, one piece. Go ahead, Dacia. Go.
Well, it was just interesting because, when I think about data and analytics, what I love about this conversation is this is the opportunity for the people, the individuals, not to be lost in these macro conversations, and something you mentioned earlier, Tiffany, you're talking about gaps in data, but if those gaps are filled, are you suggesting that they would see the trends coming, which then transitions to Chris's point about making better decisions for future, because this is interesting. I mean, there's this really heavy reliance on data for what used to be, but now we need it for what's possible and how to make decisions. So, I mean, this is a very unique point of view around numbers and spreadsheets,
Right.
you know?
Right. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Knowing our data so that we can drive our decisions and what we need to do to impact our business is going to give us, ready for it, the action that we need to take inside the organization, right? If I know you're a good performer and you've done great in your job that I hired you for that was X, Y, and Z, 4 years ago, that's wonderful. What do I know about you and how I'm going to help you develop, because we know that we have to change. So what's changing in our workforce? Chris and I talked a little bit today, and I think we both have strong opinions, but opinions are opinions, right? Around productivity in the workforce. 2020, what we've seen is we've changed the way that we had to work. We had to adapt. You could go out and probably get any one of these 3 responses. You know what? It's been great. Our productivity is up with people working remote. Cool. Or there's been no change to our productivity. It's fine. They could be in the office. They can work from home. It gives them that flexibility, that work-life balance they were looking for. Or it's been disastrous for our employees' productivity. Productivity's gone down. My question is, what did you do to measure that? What are your data points for that? Every time I've asked somebody that said that, I always get well, it's a little anecdotal right now, but the question remains, those are big decisions. If your organization's productivity is through the roof because you went remote, then you likely won't want to bring them back into the office when things are smoothed out and we're back to, being in the office. I won't say the normal word, but what if you've got it wrong? What if you made an assumption based on your emotion, your feeling, what you thought, or because you saw that one person or one type of role was doing really well? What about the other side of your business that's struggling, but you didn't dig into that data point?
Yes, I'll turn it back over to you, Chris. The one thing I would just add to that is the recency effect. If it's anecdotal, then the thing that happened most recent tells the story, and all the trends, all the real story over a time period, gone.
Yes. Yeah. And you need that understanding of the past to form a foundation and a set of information to work on. But in order to be able to predict the future, you've got to have multiple sets of data and information to be able to get there. Tiffany, one of the things I loved about those 3 different kind of places where your business could be is we see some organizations that have all 3 going on at the same time. I think it's role to role, it's job to job, it's department to department or business unit to business unit, because virtual may be great or it may be awful or it may be the same. But how do you begin to make those decisions to understand it? It's really about measuring the right set of data in order to see measurable impact. And I think, Tiffany, one of the other things you were talking about on measurable impact, we just kind of roll this together. Individuals in the organization want to see that they provide value, that they have measurable impact. I was talking to a senior leader yesterday, business leader yesterday, and he was talking about the fact that he's now beginning to wonder and question where the value and the impact of his organization inside a very large business is, because he doesn't have enough information to quantify that other than financial results. And he's recognizing in this COVID time that it's more than about finances. And he doesn't know how, when I posed the question to him, he doesn't know how to quantify the impact of individuals on the business beyond just dollars and cents. And I think that's where we're going is, how do you begin to do that? Not just to allow the business to make decisions. And by the way, all this information, the last thing we want anybody to use the data that we're going to talk about for is to determine, well, who am I keeping and who am I getting rid of? This is about, how do I take all this information and data to improve my workforce, to go hire new people that fit the culture, that fit the approach, that fit everything that we're doing. And I think that becomes really, really critical to focus on people differently, so we see the value and impact of individuals that roll up to organizations, that roll up to departments and business units, and thus the entire company.
So Chris, we talked about knowing the drivers and aligning our workforce questions. Once we've done that, how do we know what are the right data points? We even have a Q&A, and I might be taking Bennett's job, but it lines right into what we were going to talk about is, what should we be asking? And in this case, or what might not be asking, and they're looking for examples in the question, but how do we know? How do we know what the right data is?
Well, it's a great question, and we have a great process that we use that we want to share with y'all called decision analytics. Now, decision analytics and building that framework can be very, very important in terms of being able to understand what data we're going to collect or you need to collect. It goes into a couple of different steps. Number one, no surprise, you got to understand what the business drivers and the priorities of the organization is. You need to understand that completely. Second, again, no surprise, let's talk about what the workforce questions that we have and how do we prioritize those workforce questions against the priorities or business drivers of the organization. So we have to achieve those two pieces first. Now let's get down to a question, and I mentioned one earlier that we'll use as an example here around what does great look like inside the organization. What we have to do on the next step is determine what data or what information do we need to know about what great looks like. And Tiffany, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, what are some data elements about what does a great employee look like?
Well, I get to circle back to an answer I've given once, but wouldn't be any fun if I didn't give it twice. It depends. It really depends on your organization. For me and what we do, because we interact and all of most of our teams are interacting with external customers or people, is our customer service skills or our communication skills. Though, how well does somebody communicate, or how do they communicate under stress, are really important to what a great employee looks like here. If you're not working externally and you're not having to deal with clients or customers, then may not be your most critical item. So I think it depends on the organization, and it goes back to, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to build Rome? Are we trying to expand into a new market? What is it that the business is trying to do? And then how can an employee impact that? So then the workforce question is, how can an employee impact our ability to expand into a new market? That's going to impact their ability to be great. The answers to that, and then tell us the data points we need.
That's great. So as an example, when we begin to look at those data points, we might want to bring in customer satisfaction scores against and customer survey scores against that individual. There may be personality types that we know through an external third-party assessment that we want to use in order to be able to rate and evaluate that particular person. There are certain levels of achievement that we want to understand. There are things about what has a person done in terms of learning, in terms of their career path, in terms of desire to move. What does mobility look like inside the organization for this individual? And so let's look at that and say, what does great look like? We may define that there are 12 data points that we want to gather to determine what great looks like. That's the step number one. Great, now we know the data points. Next step, do we have access to that data? Do we know where we can find that data? What's really amazing is we're collecting this massive amount of data. Yet if I were to go take those 12 points and work this process with each one of you, what we would probably find is you're going to have 35 to 40% of the data you need in order to get the answer to the question. and we do this over and over again. We're collecting massive amount of information, but is it the right information? Or is there so much noise in the system, we may have collected it, we just don't even know that it's there. So the first step in that process is, let's identify the information, and now let's determine, can I get access to that? Do I have access, or is that a gap? We do it on a rating scale. 1 is great and 3 is bad. So we don't have a big rating scale, but we'll go 1, 2, and 3 in order to be able to rate that. The next piece is accuracy of information and data. That was actually our next poll question, which is pretty interesting because we may have data, but if it's inaccurate, we don't want to use inaccurate data in order to be able to make decisions. And I see that we only have 19% of the people who responded that feel their learning and talent data is accurate. And so that takes 81% that is either unsure or not confident about the information that they have. That's a critical piece of the rating because we have to have access to the information. So that's great. We got to know we have it. Then we have to be confident in the data. And then the third element of this is that we need to know what's the criticality of information and data. The first mistake everybody will make is that all 12 points of data are all critical, which is never, ever, ever true, right? We need to work into a process to understand that there are some critical elements of data that are very, very important to us. And if we take customer service skills, like you talked about, Tiffany, then the individual's ability to work with others may be a really, really critical data point. What's their past work history may have no impact or limited impact, so it's not as critical an item to be able to get in there. As we go through that framework, what this is really doing is, number one, saying, now I know the data that helps me measure impact. The second thing it does is it prioritizes where your gaps are and where you need to fill them. Because out of 12, if you've got 4 critical items, go work on the 4 critical items first. Everything else can wait. And now we've framed this in a way that you actually have a solvable problem that can begin to roll back up. Now, the nice thing about everything that I've just described is I've broken this down. So now I understand the data elements to know what great looks like, or to answer whatever workforce question you have. I know the data elements. I'm going to remediate the gaps. I know how to fill that in. I have the information, fortunately, about one person. I want to focus on that individual that I can then roll to a department, that I can then roll to a business unit, that I can then roll to the entire organization to provide information and impact around certain areas of the business. Because it's all about, how do I take that workforce question, provide the data, get back to the business driver? Because the great part of this is learning and talent professionals, we want to move to that next layer of conversation. We don't want to be the data providers to determine who's staying and who's going. We want to influence the future of the business because we have the right information and data around the workforce.
Again, you know, my passion is people. So if you're finding yourself doing this to decide who's staying and who's going, you're being reactive to a current problem. You've already missed what you needed to know to impact your business driver. Instead, we're now dealing with a problem. I would love for us all to work in a perfect world and never be sitting around deciding who needs to stay and who needs to go. I feel as more and more workforce change is coming, as the skills-based economy becomes more and more of a thing, or we're looking at skills hiring, the longer you take to start looking at what are the workforce questions you need to ask that are specific to your business drivers, and the longer it takes you to know that about your employees, you're going to find yourself in that who stays, who goes category quicker than you're going to find yourself in that. What I would love to see, or I love it when I see organizations doing this, is growing your own. You know, you have that person, their skills are becoming obsolete. What are we doing? Where are their transferable skills or relatable skills that we can them into the next thing so that they continue to help building our business?
So Karen asked a question, and Karen, I love the way that you stated the question. Hopefully everybody can see it. If not, I'm going to go ahead and read it. So you say our gap is in knowing the skills and capabilities of our colleagues and the validity of those. For example, how can I say I have the skill of creative problem solving, but how does that get validated or verified? There's actually a lot of information that's available out there to be able to go assess skills and information in a variety of formats. And some of it gets into assessment levels. So I don't know if any of you have done any of the DISC profiles, or, I mean, there's a number that are out there that begin to provide some level of information. There's actually assessments that are deeper that begin to provide that information as well. So when we look at creative problem solving, I would look at that as a question: do I have creative problem solving? And I would look for the elements that define that. And I think there's some really good resources out there to be able to find that. And now let's look at how I go collect that information. So that becomes one of the critical data points about an individual inside an organization. One of the wonderful things that's out there, there's been so much study on human beings out there. There are actually assessments on thousands of items that we really want to assess, that we just need to be able to adapt into our particular workforce in order to be able to understand what those individuals are. And Karen, I think you're in a great place, because right now you already have a really strategic question around creative problem solving. So there's a variety of information and data that's out there. We probably have your information. I'll be happy to send you a couple of locations where you can go look at that. So validating that does become critical in the process. Let me point out one other thing here. So some of it is going to be anecdotal. Some of it is going to be very objective in the process. So we still need to have reference and relationships with other individuals to help verify and quantify, because it's really easy sometimes to pass a test and the test gives you a certain subset of information, but we want to have multiple points of view in order to be able to validate that. And that's one of the reasons that we really, in this decision analytics process, need multiple data points to go validate an individual versus, oh, well, I see that Tiffany passed the test and she's a creative problem solver, but can she really? And I can tell you personally, the answer is yes, but we need points of view of experience around that as well in order to be able to gather that information. That's why the multiple data points. So I love that question. Thanks for asking that. So when we get into, Tiffany, into measurable impact, I mean, what do you think that's measurable impact is on individuals and the business itself? I mean, once we start measuring this data, we've framed it all up. We know there's changes in the workforce going on. What do you see as the success points, the places where this is going to make a big change in the business?
Oh, so many thoughts on that one. It goes back to what you're trying to solve, but I gotta bring it back to the business drivers, right? Taking care of your people, knowing what you need to do with your workforce, and it being aligned to your business drivers, you're going to be able to see the difference or the impact in your business. But as we know, with the skills-based economy, the gig work economy, contractors, taking care of our employees are really important. People want to come in. You guys have said it, DC, I believe you've even said it, is we want to make an impact. People want to make an impact on the business that they're working in. They want to see a career path. They want to see what they can do inside of that organization. By doing this, one, you're not only, the organization now sees how the people are making the impact, but two, you can communicate it back. It's going to retain your employees. I believe in our employee life cycle methodology. It starts with recruiting and it goes through a series of things and it comes back to recruiting. not because we're done with that person and we're going to hire a new one, but because now it's what's the next thing in the organization. And let's look at our internal pool of people, because we know that they have an impact, a positive impact on our organization, and we're taking care of them and meeting those needs for the individual. So knowing how they're going to impact your business drivers then allows you a way to communicate it back. As soon as they see that they're driving that their own personal value or they're impacting your business, you're going to retain your talent. Instead of having to go out to what we like to say, it's competitive. It already is competitive for certain positions, and it's only going to continue to get worse. Where to go get talent from the street, people who already possess the skills and the experiences and the capabilities that you need to do the job, we're going to have a talent shortage. We already do in certain positions or roles, if you will. But maintaining them internally, providing that confidence in your talent pool internally is only going to drive your ability to get the job done that you're trying to get done at the end of the day.
So Tiffany, I'm really struck by a couple of things there, because you're really talking about how do we use data and information to drive more and more employee engagement, which is fantastic. But the other thing, as you were talking there at the end about the development of people, what's the impact of developing your current employees on new recruits?
Well, the first one is cost, right? So you don't have to go out, you don't have to have a recruiting cost, you don't have to go onboard somebody new. You also, you know who they are, you have their data, they know who you are. And it goes back to, you've already created that engagement, right? When you're developing, I don't really think I haven't met an employee yet that says, oh, don't worry about it. Don't develop me. I don't want to get better. I'm totally fine how I am right now. Right. I have seen people leave organizations because they didn't feel that they got that. So, I mean, the number one impact or the easiest answer is it's impact to cost business. By investing in your people, you're actually, if you're doing it the right way and you're investing in the right things based on what the data tells you, you're actually going to make an impact to the bottom line for the organization.
So there's a question that I'm going to insert right here, from a participant is, what do you tell someone when they feel like they have too many data gaps? You're talking about like taking care of your people in the right way, but where did they start? Because it can get, that analysis paralysis type of approach where it just feels too big to even take on.
Yeah, I think that you have to break it down to those individual questions. I mean, what the point that y'all are that the attendee is posing is great, because you have to go break it down to the individual talent questions that you need to have answered. And I think that's a critical piece. If you break it down to the talent questions, then you break it down to the individual data elements, it makes it easier, because you're going to have to solve one problem at a time. You can't go in and ask and try to answer 100 questions at a time. And oh, by the way, there's not a shortcut that says I can actually go in and answer 100 questions by answering one question. No, you need to break these down. And I think it makes it a lot easier once you go get into those minimal elements and you begin to focus that. And then what you're going to find is that things will begin to build together. So in the framework, I've got a workforce question. The workforce question needs to have data associated with it to be able to answer. Well, now I'm asking question 2, question 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 50. The other piece that begins to happen is you start to find crossover in information and data. And you say, hey, Tiffany, wow, what I was asking in question 1 actually provides 50% of the data elements that I need on question 12. And it provides 3 on question 20. And now you begin to go through that process. And what you'll find is that the problem isn't as big as it seems. It's actually a little bit smaller in that process. And I think gets us to a very, very different position. Let me go, Tiffany, let's work through an example here. We need to go develop employees with new skills. So how do we know what skills we need to develop those employees on?
Well, what are our business drivers?
What are our business drivers? That's great. So what are our business drivers? Oh, the business is going to migrate to a different location. We've got one great client that their entire deal is their CEO has said, in this environment that we're in today, the only thing we can control is margin. So we need to go teach every single employee about margin and how their particular role has an impact on margin. So as we take them through the process, they're actually seeing, well, how do I measure on the backside that we actually have achieved an understanding? It ends up becoming a combination of business data, human capital management data, personal information, assessment, in order to wrap that back up to say, wow, I found a way to have real measurable impact on an individual and on the business as well. And I think that's the key, because if we get too caught up in analytics, to one of your points earlier, Tiffany, that if we get too caught up in this process of just trying to do analytics around the bigger business and the bigger organization, but we don't go back to the individual and say, hey, here's the impact that you had on the business, then I think that we're making a big mistake, and we're not helping with the transfer and the transition of, as y'all answered earlier, a workforce that's rapidly in change and a rapid transition as well.
I want to add to the what do we do with too many gaps? One, it's not a one and done kind of thing. You don't just go and say, well, here are the data points we need for these decisions, because the decisions or the things that the business needs to know will continue to evolve, which means you need to continuously go through this process in some form. The other thing is the reason why we rate the criticality of the data points is because it helps us prioritize where can we start first to have the biggest impact. You know, it's kind of think of what's Dave Ramsey's how to pay off all your debt, right? Let's start first where we can have the biggest impact. Once we've got that handled, let's take that effort and put it into the next thing. You're not going to have all the answers. Rome wasn't built in a day. I've not been told yet how long it took to build Rome, but it wasn't a day. And so this is something that you should continuously work on. The data and having the right data to make decisions isn't it? We had the data today. Again, we talked about how rapidly things change and how quickly people have to make decisions. But having quality data, knowing where your data points are and what you do have on hand is really a key part of this too. Chris, we didn't talk about it, but it's not uncommon for us to sit down with a client. We line out what are the pieces of data you have and say, well, these 3 I don't have, and 1 or 2 be the 2 most critical pieces of data they need to make the decision. And so it's just, you have to prioritize like we do anything else in life. Start with the thing that's going to make the biggest impact the quickest, and then move on to the next thing.
It's interesting. Also, one of my favorite things, what you're just saying, Tiffany, about listening to some of the stories and things you've shared with me is that progress, even if it's just that first step, is transformative to people's confidence. So, your passion about, I love people. I mean, I hear that so much because it's even these leaders that transform in just these small but deliberate and intentional right first steps, and so to your point about it's not about building Rome in a day, but I mean, it's amazing because it's transforming the people that are in charge of this, in addition to that legacy impact of transforming the people that they are serving. Like, so exciting.
Yeah. Chris and I were talking earlier, and one of the things we said was, the business is not going to transform itself. It's the people. And if you want the people to be transformational, you have to help transform them.
Absolutely. I think there's a common impact there, because it's not only the people that you have, it's also the people that you're going to recruit. And if people that you're recruiting, if you want to recruit the best talent, then the better job you do of taking care of your talent internally, the better recruits you're going to get. And I think we see that across the board. You've got to care for and nurture those people in the business. And this is another place with data that we're able to go in and assess and really find out how people are growing and developing. One of the things that we look at, and one of the biggest questions that I'm getting from business leaders right now is, how do I assess mobility inside my organization? Now, when we talk about mobility, it used to be, well, is Tiffany willing to move to Seattle? Or is Tiffany willing to move to London? That's not the mobility they're talking about. They're talking about flexibility in terms of skills and attributes and capabilities to move from one business unit to another, to move from one role to another role. Because as business is changing, then there's going to be roles tomorrow that didn't exist previously, and we need people to fill those. Who are the great people to go fill those particular roles? And then what are we doing to backfill the roles that they vacated? And are we setting the other people up to be in a right and a successful position as well? So when you begin to look at the data, there begin to be so many questions that we want to ask around the workforce. Business leaders are asking about mobility. How does that begin to change, and where do we need to get? So let me transition here, because I know we've got a few minutes left in the session. Tiffany, where do we see success with inside business?
Sure, especially using the decision analytics framework is definitely when we see the business and the learning and talent team partnered. Sometimes when we go into organizations, they tend to be separate. You know, learning talent maybe is folded under HR in some way, and they're kind of over in their own silo. It's really hard for you to impact the business and the business drivers if you don't have the support and partnership of that side. So when we see that there's a partnership between learning and talent in the business is one of the key areas. Other areas where we find is when they're, you know, the decision analytics framework. This is they're intentionally looking at what is the data they need to answer the question, not saying, here's the data I have, what does it tell me? And then no pride in the past. The way you did it before, it's fine, and it might have worked before. The way that you need to do it tomorrow may have to evolve. It's okay to let go with what you did in the past and to evolve and move into a new way of doing things. It doesn't mean anything was wrong. It just means that we've got to continuously find the right way to do things.
So that's great, Tiffany. So then how do we begin to turn that into meaningful action? Our guidance for you is, first and most importantly, understand and really evaluate the importance of data in making decisions inside your organization. Now, the one thing caveat I want to put in here, not all decisions are going to be made just because the data points a direction. There will be intuition, there will be experience, there will be wisdom that has to be used to interpret that data into a point of action. But the first thing you've got to understand is, what is it about the data that I need or have inside learning and talent is going to be important in making decisions inside the organization. So that's the first step that you have to establish. The second is that you have to be honest with yourself about your data challenges. The organization has to be honest with itself about data challenges. It was great in the survey. It's kind of a great and not great, right? So we're not confident in our data. And I think that is consistent when we look at learning and talent or people data in general. We're just not as confident about that as we might be financial data. And therefore, we have to accept that and begin to make changes inside the business and inside the organization to gather the right type of information and data. And then the third item is, let's go develop a decision analytics framework. Go develop a methodology which you can use ours. In fact, I'm going to make sure that we post that out and available for everybody that participated today. Go use our decision analytics framework. If you've got questions on that, we'd love to be able to help you through that. But go use that framework of really identifying the business drivers, the questions you need answered around the workforce, getting in and understanding what data elements you have, then do you have the data? Do you have access to it? What's your confidence level in the data, and what's the priority of the data? Once you begin to fold that together, you're really now taking learning and talent data and turning it into meaningful action. But it's a couple of steps in the process that you have to take. I wouldn't go out of order or immediately jump into decision analytics framework without really understanding the importance of data in decision making inside your organization, inside your piece of the organization. And you got to know that you have data challenges. It's okay. We all have it. Let's just go work together in order to be able to fix that.
Absolutely. Chris, Tiffany, thank you both so much. Everyone, we just want you to know how much we appreciate that you guys are joining. Several of you have sent us individual comments and you're letting us know what you think. Please keep doing that, because the purpose of these webinars, the purpose of the podcast coming soon, the purpose of everything that we're trying to put out there is to really help you guys care for your people, so that it transforms your business and transforms the world. And so that's why we love you guys. It's so exciting. And you sit in a place of supreme importance for the future of where we go from here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We look forward to hearing from you. Please follow us on LinkedIn. And sometimes it is healthy to have a facilitator guide and get everybody on the same page. So half-day workshops, or just even driving those conversations, ask them, reach out to them personally. I'm putting them out there. I'm holding them accountable. Ask them their questions, because that is why we are here to serve you. So thank you,
happy
everyone.
to help.
We will see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.